entrepreneurs. We can be part of that conversation with them. We already are. There's other people, and we'd make a mistake if we didn't do it. And so as a result, I try to get a lot of young Austrian economists to do things like economic history, rather than history of thought. Look out the window. If you can solve a problem that's out the window better than alternative schools of thought, the world will beat a path to your door. If you look out, if you say, oh, I don't want to look at the window, I just want to look at the blackboard and study the genealogy of a bunch of old ideas. No, people have a right. I mean, you could make a living doing that, but people have a right to say, well, what's this have to say about my economics?
To make it clear, are you saying that the Austrian School of Economics then completely hangs on the idea of radical uncertainty?
Saying that the Boettke/Kirzner view does, right? So there are other, so as I said, I wanted to apologize in advance to all the anti-Boettke Austrians right out there. So your views may or may not have been attacked today. Only you can decide. However, in terms of, you can really get this out of Kirzner's 1996 Journal of Economic Literature piece, where he actually talks about search theory and gives it enough ground that you realize if he just caved in on radical ignorance, there'd be nothing left. Literally zero. Right? And that extreme claim, but I think that's basically true.
I think there's one problem. Well, first of all, let me follow up on that. Tyler Cowen, for example, outside of this university, he's an Austrian. Inside of this university, he's not an Austrian, but anywhere else in the world, he is. I think Bryan might have successfully escaped the label, but maybe not. But I think he has, because he's like invested more time in saying he isn't. But I actually don't think feasibly, that he is. But I think one of the problems is, I'd like to. Brian's going to think I'm nuts for bringing this up. I don't think all this stuff about sheer ignorance and all that stuff is like where you should rest it all, but I do think there's an issue about the notion of error, genuine error. And even in your own approach of rational stupidity, they're not making an error. It's not an error. It's actually very rational. It's not it's extremely rational for them to engage in the activity that they're engaging in, giving their context. So they're not really making an error.
Sure, it's an error. They think something that isn't true. That's an error.
No, but they don't pay any penalty for it, so it's not an error.
I mean, a test that doesn't count is still a test. You can give a final exam saying this doesn't count in your grade. Nevertheless, the wrong answers are still wrong. There's still errors. There's still real errors, genuine errors, just errors that you don't have to pay for.
And I think that this goes back to the gentleman's point before about the path, to Ted's point about the path to equilibrium, because the issue about entrepreneurial discoveries and the path by which you get from a disequilibrium situation to an equilibrium situation is also one in which has problems of errors and the remediation of errors. And there's difficulties in all this, and it seems that we are caught at least in an analytical trap, which is highlighted in the path dependency debates between Bryan Author and Paul David on the one hand, who point out that we can get locked in to an error, to the Leibowitz and Margolis position, which is that if it's not a remedial error, it's not an error. And see, so the notion of error has always been difficult for economists to deal with. George Stigler, right? Not picking up a $20 bill because $21 cost me to bend down to pick it up is not an error, right? I'm foregoing that profit opportunity. That's how Stigler would view the world. And it seems to me that there is something there that, and I'm not saying, now this is you might say it's not a unpromising, thing or whatever, but it seems to me that if economists could address this issue of error and how individuals cope with error and adjust behaviors in response to error and error detection and correction mechanisms, that's actually an advance to our understanding of how markets work. And Austrian economists at least are putting that question on the table if they don't have an answer to it.
So then, are you getting at that with a rational stupidity case where debating the point of an error, it's not necessarily an error, but someone who's a victim of a poor institutional framing? And is the difference there in the rational stupidity?
That's how I would understand what Brian's arguing, but maybe I misunderstand his argument. I mean, but that's how I would understand it, that it's similar to Stigler's 21. In that institutional environment, for me to correct my belief would cost me $21, and the benefit is only $20. So why should I correct my belief? It's not an error.
Right, and there I really do think that neoclassical economists in general will say, well, of course we talk about error and they're correct. Right, so I mean, you have a rational expectations model, right? There's error in there. However, you say, no, that's not error, that's not real error, it's not genuine error. Genuine error is error plus something else, right? And the plus is something very ephemeral.
I don't want to go down it, but I mean, I think that it's important to look at Franklin Fisher's stuff on the disequilibrium foundations of equilibrium economics and the role that error plays and the constraints error has to have formally in order to get convergence to an equilibrium. I mean, I don't want to go down this path, but I think it's a big issue. And I think most of us just punt on it. We say, oh, well, that's too hard, screw it. And we go on. And that's okay for most of the things, but on a technical issue of how it is that a market actually clears, I think we have to come to grips with these things. And if market clearing is essential to the defense of a free society, right, you have to answer that question to get to the defense of the free society. So yeah, maybe I'm nutty about that. I'm not nutty about always putting sheer in front of words, or radical in front of words. I'm not that attached to the adverbs or whatever.
Doug?
Back to Ted one more time. In terms of your response to him, you were saying that, well, economists sort of know this. They don't, neoclassicals don't play up these factors so much as Austrians do, but they still know about it and it's in the background. Well, that's true for some, but it's not true for a lot of neoclassical economists. As you well know, there was a huge debate between Harvard and Chicago over advertising, as whether it's a process by which we inform consumers, so on and so forth, and information gets disseminated, or if it's waste or perhaps anti-competitive, establishing monopoly. And there are some economists who have learned from Teltzer and Benham and Stigler and have that in the background and realize that it is a worthwhile process. Austrians never forgot that because they were always focused on the process rather than doing optimization problems and looking at the end state. But there are still a lot of neoclassical economists, outside of the Chicago influence, who claim that this and a number of other processes besides advertising are either wasteful or anti-competitive, and it's easier for them to do that because they're constantly doing constrained optimization, looking at these equilibria, and not really thinking through the processes that Austrians never forget about because they never stop looking at it and never stop thinking about it.
Yeah, well, I'll say that's perfectly true. And it's quite true. There are plenty of neoclassical economists who don't really understand their own theory very well. On the other hand, of course, there's plenty of Austrians who don't understand a lot of Austrian stuff. I wouldn't say that it's which Pete seems to be completely in agreement with, so I'll defer to him on that. Right, so I mean, just to say, yes, half of the people who adopt the label don't understand some big parts of it. That's life. That's the way the world works, unfortunately.
I think Bryan and I have the same thing. There's an overlap. What he calls what he calls neoclassical economics correctly understood is sneakingly close to what I would call Austrian economics correctly understood. And so, except for slight nuanced differences. So that's why we can agree. That's why I'm only 1 point off on his test. However, we do know other economists who were trained at very good schools who took that test and scored wildly wrong. Less than 50%, right?
Sure.
And those questions.
Of course, it's a normative test.
Well, but it's based on judgment issues which come out of our understanding of economics.
Partly.
I'd say a lot more. I think Bryan doesn't think economics is necessary to carry the lion's share of the defense of a libertarian